Hi, my name is Kristen Szabo, and I'm the administrator of the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage. I am co-presenting with Ken McGwire, Associate Research Professor at the Desert Research Institute, and we will be talking about the history of Nevada's wetland program and our current efforts. Nevada Natural Heritage has been involved with Nevada's wetland program since the early 2000s. Due to the lack of full-time wetland staff, the wetland program has been mostly project-based over the years. During this presentation, I'll go through a timeline and list of projects that have occurred since 2002, talk a little bit about our current work, and share my short-term and long-term goals for the Nevada Wetland Program. In 2002, a collaborative project between Nevada Natural Heritage, the Division of State Parks, and Department of Wildlife was funded by an EPA Wetland Program Development Grant, a National Park Service Planning Grant, and a Department of the Interior Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. This project resulted in the 2006 Nevada Priority Wetlands Conservation Plan and the 2008 Nevada Priority Wetlands Inventory. The next project was a collaboration between Nevada Natural Heritage, the Nature Conservancy, and the Desert Research Institute. This project was funded by Nevada's Question 1 Bond Initiative and an EPA Wetland Program Development Grant. The result was the Nevada Springs Conservation Plan, which summarizes the condition of 283 high-priority wetlands that are supported by springs, identifies potential threats, and highlights actions necessary to conserve these unique and biodiverse systems. A project funded through an EPA Wetland Program Development Grant in 2011 had two components. The Desert Research Institute conducted a springs assessment focusing on the effects of disturbance on benthic macroinvertebrate communities, and Nevada Natural Heritage prepared a state wetland program plan, a 6-year plan developed within the EPA's core elements framework that is used to guide the wetland program through specific objectives, actions, and activities. Using the Nevada Wetland Program Plan as a guide, we were awarded an EPA Wetland Program Development Grant in 2017, which focused on 4 topics. We collaborated with the Museum of Northern Arizona's Springs Stewardship Institute to inventory springs and incorporate Nevada data into the Springs Online database, the Desert Research Institute, who developed a GIS-based landscape-level wetland analysis tool, the Nature Conservancy, who developed a draft rapid assessment protocol for Nevada wetlands, and the Nevada Department of Wildlife, who led the development of a spring snail conservation agreement and strategy for Nevada and Utah spring snails. All of the documents I've mentioned so far are available on our website, which is heritage.nv.gov/wetlands. And that brings us to our current grant efforts, which I'll talk about more on the next few slides. We continue our collaboration with the Springs Stewardship Institute, Desert Research Institute, and the Nature Conservancy with funding from an EPA Wetland Program Development Grant and EPA multi-purpose grants. And we continue working towards the goals and objectives of the Nevada Wetland Program Plan through these 3 core elements: monitoring and assessment, voluntary restoration and protection, and sustainable financing. We continue the monitoring and assessment work through surveys, springs and wetland-dependent species data mining, and data management with the Springs Stewardship Institute and the Nature Conservancy. All of the data collected will be incorporated into the Natural Heritage and Springs Online databases as appropriate, and also incorporated into the Level 1 Wetland Analysis Toolbar to increase its functionality. The Springs Stewardship Institute continues development of Springs Online and incorporation of Nevada Springs data from various sources into that database. The outreach task is being led by the Springs Stewardship Institute and includes a Springs State of Knowledge Symposium, webinars, and on-the-ground Springs survey training. Several webinars have already occurred, and recordings are available on the Springs Stewardship Institute website, which is springstewardshipinstitute.org/webinars. These last 2 bullets are tasks being conducted by the Desert Research Institute, increasing the functionality of the Level 1 Wetland Analysis Tool, and updating the 2006 Nevada Priority Wetlands Inventory. Just to give you an idea of the current monitoring and assessment efforts in the last year alone, the Springs Stewardship Institute and Division of Natural Heritage have visited, surveyed, and assessed 177 springs throughout the state, indicated by the yellow dots on these 2 maps. In addition to fieldwork, we also curate data into our respective databases from current surveys, previous surveys, and data obtained from other sources. Curated records are shown on these maps in blue and total 376 records for the year spanning November 2019 to November 2020. I also want to mention our efforts to increase partner and stakeholder engagement and awareness of the Nevada Wetland Program. We've done this through conference presentations such as this one, through the creation of a Nevada Wetlands Collaborative Google group, through our website, and through participation on species-specific working groups, for example, the Spring Snail Conservation Team. Looking to the future, my short-term plan is to work towards increasing staff capacity dedicated full-time to wetlands, continue to chip away at collecting baseline data for the thousands of springs that haven't been assessed, and continue to develop and share useful wetland analysis tools that can be used by stakeholders throughout the state. Looking longer term, Nevada needs a wetlands inventory and centralized database for all wetland types. A centralized information system will create a baseline from which other efforts can occur, including efficient wetlands monitoring and assessments, and better wetland restoration and protection planning and project tracking. With comprehensive baseline data, for example, we could then conduct analyses to quantify greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration to help meet the state's climate mitigation goals. And finally, establishing a long-term funding mechanism to accomplish all of this would really help all of my wishes come true. Thanks for your attention, and I would now like to turn it over to Ken McGwire.
Hello, I'm Ken McGwire of the Desert Research Institute in Reno, Nevada. DRI is one of several institutional partners who are collaborating with the Nevada Division of Natural Heritage to support the state's wetland program plan. DRI has been developing tools for Level 1 assessments of wetland habitats in Nevada. To provide an organized approach to the information about the geography and history of various wetland sites around the state, we've developed an application that runs in the ArcMap desktop geographic information system. We call this application the Wetland Level 1 Assessment Toolbar, or WetBar. WetBar runs as a Python-based toolbar in ArcMap, which you can see here at the top. There's a need to manage information about numerous sites around the state, so sites are tagged with informative labels that are generated either automatically by the other GIS variables in the system or assigned by the user. Here, we might choose to select sites that are associated with the 2007 Nevada Priority Wetland Inventory that was coordinated by Nevada Heritage. Here, we've limited the list now to 234 sites, but we might want to be more specific. We could narrow things down by county, or we can use combinations of tags. So for example, let's look at sites that have the lake tag associated with them. There's a lake somewhere within their boundary. And also, let's say that they have a BLM land that intersects with their polygon. Now we've significantly reduced the number of sites to consider. We might further assign a new tag, let's call it Lake Calc, to select a subset from those sites manually. So these are the sites that were in the pull down, and I can select and limit that to a certain subset with a new Lake Calc tag. Let's zoom in on Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge as an example. The boundary of Stillwater is checked out of the geodatabase, displayed in yellow, and there are a number of static overlays that we can turn on that bring in sources such as soil series maps or EPA ecoregions, or we may dynamically download information from Google Earth Engine with historical satellite imagery, photography, or climate data. We could choose a particular month and year by selecting which month here and entering the year here. Right now, let's just download the most recent wetness information for the site. We'll look within the most recent 14 days and go out to Google Earth Engine to retrieve the recent wetness index. And when it comes back, we can see these are areas in white are the areas that are currently inundated at the refuge. And this might be useful in terms of planning excursions to know which areas are flooded, where you would focus your level 2 field work. Now, making use of the historical coverage of Landsat satellites, we can also look at what's been going on at the site at different timescales We can look at what is the typical sort of situation at the site at a given month. This would be from the wetness index over time from 1985 to present for each month from January to where it peaks wetness in February and there's minimum wetness in September. Or we might also look at the interannual variability of the situation at the site. Let's use this plot here, and this would show a stacked bar graph that indicates the percent cover by water, bare or sparse vegetation, or more dense vegetation. So this dark blue shows how the inundated area within the drawn boundary has varied over time from 1985 to 2019, and we can see the vegetation has been slowly expanding over this time as well. As WetBar collects Google Earth Engine data over time, it develops correlations and time series statistics that can be used to sort the sites for the purposes of prioritization or ranking. So for example, let's sort the sites based on the correlation between their percent inundation in August and the Palmer Drought Severity Index. Now the list has the least correlated or most negatively correlated sites at the top of the list. And let's look at Walker Lake. So the change in Walker Lake over time has been decreasing, and we'll see that it's fairly uncorrelated with the cycles of drought since 1985. The green line is the percent of the polygon that's inundated with water. The blue line is Palmer Drought Severity Index varying over time, and we see that they're really not very closely related. In contrast, sites that are now at the bottom of this list are highly correlated between inundation status and the Palmer Drought Severity Index. Taking the last one on the list, Calcutta Lakes, as an example, we see their playas, and we would expect that the inundation status would be driven by drought cycles. And bringing up the plot, we do see a strong relationship between the green line for inundation area versus the blue line for Palmer Drought Severity Index. Tools like these allow us to understand the longer-term dynamics of Nevada's wetlands and create a framework for intercomparison and monitoring. Currently within WetBar, we're developing tools to look at within-site variability. Here on the left we have an image of the Shell Creek Range with riparian areas mapped in colors that correspond to a clustering based on the statistical patterns in Landsat data and climate data. Most of the sites, as you see, are a green color. The areas that show up in orange are statistically different and are also in areas of an internal valley that have much deeper alluvium than the confined drainages in the rest of the area. We see another anomalous site in the top right, which is shown in magenta. Using WetBar, we can explore why that magenta site was anomalous. The plot on the top right shows the vegetation index from Landsat from 1985 to 2020, and the magenta site was running above the green sites from 1985 to 2011, but then there was a disturbance event, and the vegetation index has not recovered since then. Looking at 2011 in WetBar, we see that there was a fire in that drainage that year. And looking at the bottom right plot, we understand why it hasn't bounced back, because that fire happened at the beginning of a period of drought, as shown by the blue line. We are currently using WetBar and outreach to stakeholders to try to update the Nevada Priority Wetlands Inventory of 2007 to reflect current conditions in the state. In the near term, we'll be integrating data on threatened and sensitive species into the WetBar analysis framework, and also bringing in data on water quality and quantity from the USGS National Water Information System. In the longer term, we'd really like to link this capability to in-situ monitoring to create a real-time monitoring framework that could support adaptive management. We'd like to create an online dashboard with these tools so that we can have better dissemination of the information and possibly better coordination between different groups. We'd like to also continue and build on our stakeholder engagement, the latest example of which is using WetBar and its tools to support the Lahontan Cutthroat Interagency Recovery Partners.
Thank you for your interest in Nevada's Wetland Program. Ken and I will be available during the live Q&A panel session immediately following this session to answer any questions you may have.